welcome. If you're someone who really likes to, get to grips with a topic quickly and properly, understand the core ideas without all the fluff, then you're in the right place.
Definitely.
Today, we're diving into a specific YouTube video. It's by Sergei Kontsavoy, titled "INTUs," which roughly translates to "perfect atheist."
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not like a formal lecture. It's in Russian, very conversational, just Kontsavoy exploring his own thoughts on atheism. More of a personal take, really.
Great. So our goal here isn't to give the final word on atheism, obviously.
No, not at all.
We want to unpack Kontsavoy's specific perspective, especially this idea he has that atheism functions like a belief system, and his pretty unique concept of a perfect atheist. We're aiming to pull out the key arguments for you so you get the essence without needing to wade through the whole original video.
Okay, let's jump in.
So Kontsavoy kicks off with a pretty foundational claim, doesn't he?
He does.
He basically says atheism, just like any big global way of looking at things, acts as a form of belief. Almost, I think he implies, like a religion in terms of its impact.
That's a core part of his argument right there. He frames it as this sort of binary choice everyone faces, maybe without even realizing it.
A binary choice. How so?
Well, either you believe there's something more, something beyond what you can literally see and touch, or you doubt that. You don't believe in those unseen things.
Okay.
And for Kontsavoy, whichever path you take, that fundamentally becomes your worldview. It's the filter for everything else.
And he stresses that this happens to everyone, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you've read tons of books and never cracked one open.
Exactly. He argues that from a certain age, we all develop some kind of framework for understanding the world. It's unavoidable.
Now, here's where it gets, well, maybe a bit controversial. He worries that if we don't consciously build this worldview, it might just default to something he calls vulgar Satanism.
Yeah, that term definitely catches your attention.
Why vulgar Satanism? What's he getting at there? He links it to seeing the world's imperfections.
I don't think he means literal devil worship, It seems more like a default negativity, a kind of pessimistic stance you fall into if you just see all the problems and suffering without really thinking deeper about why things are the way they are.
So a lack of critical engagement leads to this sort of bleak outlook.
That seems to be the idea. It's like a shortcut based on surface-level observation of the world's flaws.
Okay. And he also pushes back against dismissing atheism too easily, doesn't he? Like just saying, well, I can't see it, so it's not real.
Right. He thinks that's a pretty simplistic take. And he uses that analogy, radio waves.
Yes, the radio waves. Good one.
Can't see them, can't touch them, but our phones, our radios, they work just fine.
So it shows the limits of just relying purely on what's immediately observable.
Precisely. He's saying, look, just because something isn't directly visible doesn't mean it's irrelevant or non-existent. It challenges a narrow view of reality.
Then he brings in this concept, metaphysical intoxication. What's that about? He links it to apathy.
Yeah, it's an interesting phrase. He suggests some atheists might get so caught up in a purely material explanation for everything that they become maybe uninterested, apathetic towards bigger questions about meaning, maybe ethics, consciousness, things that don't neatly fit a purely physical model.
And he sees a danger in that, like weakened logic.
It seems he worries it could lead to less rigorous thinking, a kind of uncritical acceptance of just one level of reality, potentially shutting down deeper inquiry.
Okay, so he's not painting all atheists with the same brush. He makes distinctions.
Definitely. He talks about smart atheists, scientists, thinkers, cultural figures.
And what distinguishes them, in his view?
He believes they consciously avoid what he calls the trap of religious Satanism.
Okay, there's that Satanism term again, but religious Satanism this time. What does he mean by that?
Well, connecting back to his worldview idea, this seems to mean a belief system that still includes figures like a creator, gods, angels, and, crucially, demons.
Ah, the demons. Why is the belief in demons such a sticking point for him?
Because for Kontsavoy, introducing demons brings in this irrational element, these external, maybe malevolent forces. He argues that believing in them gets in the way of seeing the world clearly as it actually is.
It obstructs accepting reality.
That's his argument. It adds a layer of the supernatural or inexplicable that he thinks intellectually serious atheists deliberately reject. They favor a more rational understanding of why things happen.
Okay, that makes sense within his framework. And this leads us to his idea of the perfect atheist, which, as you said, is quite unique.
It really is.
It doesn't start where you might expect, like being the loudest person denying God.
No, the first step, according to Consovoy, is actually to abandon the idea that the world itself is inherently imperfect.
Right. Let go of the idea that the world is fundamentally flawed. Why? What's his reasoning?
It's quite thought-provoking. He basically points to the fact that, well, the world keeps going, doesn't it? It exists, it functions, and successful gene combinations, whether they arise naturally or through other means, they persist. This shows a kind of resilience, an inherent ability to keep going. He sees that as sort of fundamental perfection or soundness.
But he doesn't ignore the bad stuff, right?
Yeah.
The cruelty, the suffering.
Oh, no, not at all. He acknowledges that the world can seem merciless, absolutely.
So what's the response then, if not railing against its imperfections?
His solution is accept that baseline reality, the way things are, and then actively work to improve your own situation. Intellectually, emotionally, physically, economically, take action within the world as it is.
It's a very pragmatic, proactive stance then.
Very. It's about agency within the given system, not getting stuck on wishing the system itself is fundamentally different.
And he even suggests there's a community, these people already, these perfecto, who see the world as basically sound.
Yeah, he mentions this idea of a group, maybe informal, who share this view. It implies a kind of shared understanding that, despite all the problems, the universe isn't fundamentally broken.
That feels surprisingly optimistic in a way.
It does lean towards emphasizing human potential and what we can achieve within the existing reality.
Okay, but then he offers another path, right? A way to ditch the imperfection idea
Yeah.
without necessarily having to buy into the inherent perfection idea.
Yes, a second path, which he presents as maybe more complex, more subtle.
And he uses that Indian wisdom analogy, the needle and the splinter.
That's the one. Knowledge is the needle you use to remove the splinter of ignorance. But once the splinter's out...
You don't need the splinter or the needle anymore. Okay, got it.
Right, so apply that here. Once you've mentally dismantled the idea that the world is inherently imperfect, removed that splinter from your worldview, then the whole concept of perfect might just become irrelevant too. You're not judging the world against that ideal anymore, positive or negative. You've moved beyond that whole dichotomy.
That's a fascinating way to frame it. You just dissolve the negative concept rather than needing to replace it with its opposite.
Exactly. It's about clearing mental space, perhaps.
And he notes that for people on this path, looking at the non-ideal parts of the world, the bits that seem to resist smooth functioning, that becomes an intellectual challenge.
Precisely. It stops being just a source of complaint and becomes, well, interesting. An area for analysis, for figuring out why things are challenging, why they deviate, problem solving rather than just lamenting.
He also briefly touches on education's role in all this.
He does. He seems concerned that flaws or gaps in how we educate people might contribute to negative or unhappy worldviews forming later on.
Regardless of belief, whether someone's theistic or atheistic.
Yes. It highlights how much importance he puts on developing critical thinking and a balanced understanding early on. He notes many people seem to live unhappy lives, irrespective of their metaphysical beliefs.
And wrapping up, his advice for people uncomfortable with, let's say, grand metaphysical schemes.
It boils down to rely on science, understand the evidence, acknowledge the world can be harsh, face that reality.
But also remember our own role.
Crucially, yes. Remember that the messiness in the human world, the injustices, the problems, those are largely things we've created. And so it's up to us, through our own efforts, to try and fix them.
A call for rational, human-centered action.
Exactly. Grounded understanding paired with taking responsibility.
Okay, so let's quickly recap Consovoy's main thrust for everyone listening. He's putting forward this idea that even atheism acts like a belief system shaping our view. And his path to becoming a so-called perfect atheist isn't about simple denial, but involves either seeing an inherent resilience or soundness in the world.
Or the alternative path.
Or completely shedding the very concept of the world being imperfect in the first place. Lots to chew on there.
Definitely challenges conventional thinking on belief in atheism.
Which brings us nicely to a final thought for you, our listener. Take a moment to consider your own worldview, whatever it may be. What role does this idea of perfection or imperfection play in how you see things?
How does that concept shape your understanding, your reactions to the world around you?
It's worth reflecting on Consovoy's perspective, even if you disagree, thinking about how different frameworks shape our grasp of fundamental ideas like reality and belief.
You might even want to explore other philosophical takes or different views on atheism to deepen that understanding.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.